Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
They missed the day I had been working toward for years, the day that lived on my calendar long enough to collect tiny notes and reminders and late-night pep talks that I recorded into my phone when no one was listening. And while I could pretend it was fine because the program still ran and the room still clapped and the live stream still captured every second, I knew the quiet I walked back to would not be the kind of quiet that means peace, but the kind that sits across from you and asks why. The people who claim you are their pride treat your biggest moment like an errand they can run later. I had told them early, with friendly texts and simple invites that did not guilt or beg, because I did not want attendance purchased with obligation. I wanted the kind of showing up that says I matter even when it is inconvenient. And what I got instead were messages with smiley tone and soft doubts about traffic and schedules and how life got in the way, which would be understandable if that same life did not somehow clear a path every time my brother wanted a last-minute dinner or my cousin announced a half-baked side hustle that required immediate applause and shared posts, and as I watched the seats we had reserved for my family sit there with their names printed and unclaimed, I felt something settle, not rage exactly. More like a decision finally standing up and stretching its arms. I kept my face steady because the camera does not care how your stomach flips, it only records whether you flinch, and I would not hand them a flinch. I spoke as planned. I thanked the right people. I signed what needed a signature. I shook hands I had earned the right to shake, and the whole time I could hear my mother's voice from earlier weeks telling me that of course she would be there, and that she would bring a friend who had always wanted to see me in action, and I could hear my aunt saying she already bought a dress for it, and I could hear my best friend from college promising to drive in before dawn, and then the timeline slid forward to today, and there was no mother, no aunt, no best friend. Just flowers from people who actually did show up and a row of empty chairs that were not just empty, they were loud with excuses I did not ask for. I am not innocent here either, because I trained them to think I would understand. I trained them to believe I would smooth over their absence and say it was no big deal. I trained them by picking up the phone after every slight and making it easy. And on this day I realized that the same discipline I used to get here would have to be used on them too. Not as a punishment, but as a reset, because if I keep paying the bill for their comfort, they will keep ordering the special and sending back the check. When the event ended and the room began to loosen, I went to a quieter corner and looked at my phone, and I could see the first messages already stacking up. Little bubbles of apologies wrapped in compliments and silly explanations that tried to make a flat tire sound like destiny and a late meeting sound like a national emergency. And I felt the tug to answer quickly the way I always do, to make it easy again. To hand them the same forgiveness I keep on the hallway table like a spare key, and I put the phone back in my bag because that tug has been running my life for too long. I thought about who I would have been if they had shown up, the version of me who would have smiled toward the family row and felt safe in that soft way you feel when your people are there, and I realized that version of me is always temporary and always a little smaller. Because I lower my voice for them, I trim my edges for them, I make room for their comfort even in spaces I built with my own work, and I felt this sudden clarity that the nicest thing I can do for myself is stop giving discounts on my presence to people who price it at zero the moment it is inconvenient. There is a difference between asking for validation and asking for basic respect, and I do not need their clapping to mean I did something real. But I also do not have to pretend that their absence is neutral, because absence is a statement, it is a vote. It is a record of what you chose when the choice was public and time-stamped, and since they chose not to stand with me when it counted, I am allowed to decide how we speak going forward, and I am allowed to decide where the boundary sits and how tall it is and who has to knock. So I thanked the crew. I thanked the strangers who had become something better than family because they kept showing up even when it was not fun, and I walked out with my bag feeling lighter than I expected, not because the hurt was gone, but because the plan finally existed, and the plan was simple and firm and a little mean in the way steel is mean when you hit it with your hand, and it went like this. I will tell the truth once, publicly, clearly, without tears or pleading, and then I will let silence do the work I have been doing for everyone else. When I reached the car, I sat for a moment and watched the screen on the dashboard mirror light my face in a way that would have been nice if I cared about photos, and I knew exactly what was going to happen next. I knew there would be a camera and a red light and a lens that does not blink, and I knew the sentence I would say that would carry every year I have spent proving I am not fragile or needy or willing to be somebody's afterthought, and I felt calm, not kind, not cruel, just steady. Because for once I was not asking them to meet me where I am, I was meeting myself there first, and the next thing I would do would make that very, very clear. I stood in the wings pretending to listen to the wrap-up chatter that always follows a program like this, the kind of soft congratulations that glide past you when people do not know what to say beyond good job and so proud and let us get a photo. While my eyes drifted again and again toward that neat row of seats with the little printed cards that might as well have been blinking signs, because it is one thing to tell yourself they probably got stuck in traffic, and it is another thing entirely to watch the seats you reserved sit there like placeholders for a version of your life where people actually show up, and in that moment I stopped doing the mental gymnastics I have done for years to make their behavior sound reasonable. Because I remembered every tiny way I have bent to make them comfortable, every time I excused something that really bothered me because I did not want to start a fight, and I realized that whatever I said next would either continue that pattern or end it. I thought about the way my mother says she is my biggest supporter while also telling me to be patient with people who do not take me seriously. I thought about the way my aunt collects my wins like trinkets. She can name drop in her circles without ever lifting a finger when I need actual help. I thought about the friend who swears she loves me but treats my work like a cute hobby that will eventually settle into something safer, and I could feel how small I have allowed myself to be in there. Presence just to keep the peace, which is wild when you consider that peace costs the most when you are the only one paying for it. So when the camera guy waved that the live stream was rolling for the closing segment and the producer asked if I wanted to add anything, I surprised myself by saying yes, because this would be the last time I would carry a burden that was not mine. I walked center stage like a person who has told themselves they are done apologizing, not loud, not dramatic, just done. And I let the applause die down and thanked everyone who actually came and thanked the staff who made the whole thing work and thanked the mentors who never left me guessing about whether their support was real, and then I looked straight into the lens. Not into the room and not at the empty chairs because they already had enough of my attention, and I said very calmly, too. The people who were not there but who would absolutely be watching from wherever they were hiding, to anyone watching who did not show up, I see you. And I left it exactly like that because I did not need to say names or list excuses or create a laundry pile of reasons that would just invite debate, since the truth does not require a defense and the lens does not flinch. The room had that quick intake sound that groups make when a sentence lands harder than expected, a collective O that flickers across faces when everyone understands exactly what just happened, and for a second I wondered if I had gone too far. If I had turned a private disappointment into a public moment that would be criticized later for being petty or unprofessional. But the thought passed as quickly as it came because the point was not to humiliate anyone. The point was to stop protecting people from the natural consequences of their choices, and if my one clear sentence made a few folks finally uncomfortable, then maybe we were, at long last, aligned. I wrapped the rest of my remarks with the same steady voice I had used all day, thanked the audience again, and stepped off to the side where the stage manager clipped my mic and told me it was a good line in that careful tone people use when they mean strong but are trying not to choose a side, and I smiled and said thank you because I did not need a side anymore. What I needed was a boundary I would not erase when someone knocked with a sad story and a smiling voice, which is why I turned my phone face down when it began to buzz, because I knew exactly what those messages would look like without opening a single one. You can feel the shape of an excuse before you read it, the way it curves from blame to charm and lands on poor me with that familiar weight that tries to make you the supervisor of other people's decisions, and I had carried that clipboard for too many years already. So I let the calls roll through to nowhere, and I let the texts stack into a wall, and I let the emails ping my inbox in a rhythm that probably felt like urgency to the senders, but felt like relief to me, since every new notification meant my sentence had found its target without me chasing anyone, and while I knew there would be fallout and probably some fresh performative drama in the family chat, I also knew this was the moment I had promised myself in the car. The clean cut instead of the careful stitch. The truth said once, and then the quiet that follows when you choose yourself on purpose. I gathered my bag and the folder I needed to sign a few final documents, nodded to the team, and headed toward the hallway where the exit light glowed over a door that had always looked ordinary to me, but now felt like a line I was finally crossing. And as I reached for the handle, my phone lit the inside of my purse with a steady white flashing that told me the clip of my line was already being replayed and shared and screen recorded by the very people who skipped the seats I saved for them. Which would have made me anxious on any other day, yet today felt like confirmation that I had aimed with precision, and while the part of me that is trained to soothe wanted to pick up and explain and make it easy, the woman who looked into that lens had already decided that easy is not my job anymore. So I walked out and the buzzing grew louder, and I did not look back as the flood began. By the time I left the building, the lock screen on my phone had become a parade of previews that tried to look like concern, but read like a jury summoning me to perform my old job of comforting grown adults. And while habit pushed me to swipe one open and start the usual cycle of smoothing and reframing and telling them it was fine, I caught myself in that tiny pause before a reflex becomes a decision and set the phone face down in my bag. Because if I meant what I said on stage, then the first person who needed to hear me was me, and the clearest way to prove that was to let every call roll past, every text stack up, and every email slide into the folder I created on the walk to the car, which I named after the show because humor helps when you are rearranging your life, and inside that folder I set an automatic reply that did not apologize or invite debate. It simply said that this inbox is not monitored for personal messages, and that any offers or requests should go through the team form, which meant no one could claim I went dark while still making it clear I was done being the family switchboard. I know what people think when they hear someone set a boundary like that. They imagine icy silence or vindictive payback, and maybe a part of me wanted to hit back in that cheap way that feels good for 5 minutes and costs you later. But the bigger part of me wanted results I could live with, and results do not come from screaming into a phone at midnight. They come from changing the rules and refusing to explain the change 10 different ways to soothe the very people who benefit from your confusion, which is why I drove home without music and wrote a simple post that thanked everyone who had actually shown up, tagged the crew and the mentors who had been reliable since day one, and then, right under the thank you, I pinned a short note that said I would not be reading private apologies, that I would not be addressing attendance in direct messages, and that if anyone felt moved to support the work, they were welcome to sponsor community seats for the next round or fund travel for attendees who could not afford it. And, because I am so tired of performative regret, I added a public running list titled People Who Showed Up, where I planned to write the names of donors and volunteers, which meant anyone desperate to manage optics would have to do something useful to see their name appear. And I have never felt a cleaner kind of satisfaction than I did pressing post without sending a single reply to the people who wanted my time more than they wanted my success. The messages kept coming as if volume could reverse what happened on that stage. Long paragraphs from my mother with soft words about how families are complicated and timing is hard. Cheerful voice notes from my aunt that tried to spin her absence into a cute misunderstanding about the start time. A string of texts from my cousin that somehow turned my one sentence into a betrayal of our blood, while also reminding me she had promoted my work last year and did I remember that, and the part that would have hooked me in the past, the one that massages your guilt until you give up your boundary, was the series of short messages from my best friend Tessa, the person I once believed would always stand up for me. Starting with I am so sorry and sliding quickly into can we talk now, and then into we need to fix this before it gets bigger, and even though I did not open them I could feel the heat of her urgency through the glass. A kind of panic that sounded less like care and more like self-protection. I took a long shower instead of reading anything and then made dinner I could eat with one hand while I organized the public list, and within an hour people I barely knew had added their names with small donations and offers to volunteer. Strangers who had watched the stream and decided that if the people closest to me could not show up then they would, which did not erase the hurt but did something more useful by proving my support did not have to be begged out of the same few relatives who treat attendance like a favor they might grant on a clear day, and when a producer from a podcast I respect messaged my work account asking if I would come on to talk about the project and the line that had suddenly started bouncing around social feeds, I forwarded it to my team contact with a simple yes, because I was not going to waste my voice on people who only hear me when there is an audience they want to impress, and I was not going to sacrifice an opportunity because my family had decided to create a sideshow. What I did next probably looked petty if you only saw the screenshot and not the years behind it, but for me it felt like justice that did not require a raised voice. Because I posted one quiet photo to my story of the reserved row with the name cards turned backward so no one could read them, and the caption said, "Only reserved does not mean present. Thank you to everyone who made their way into the room." Then I muted every relative for a full month and turned off read receipts so no one could weaponize my silence into mystery or chase me for timestamps, and I slept better than I have in a very long time knowing that my house was not a customer service desk and that the scoreboard now rewarded action instead of narrative. I woke to more notifications than I have ever seen on my phone, a familiar chaos made unfamiliar by the fact that I had zero intention of stepping into it, and as I poured coffee I watched names I recognized flash across the top of the screen. Not because I was reading anything, but because you cannot unsee the shape of a pattern you have finally named, and in the middle of that blur I saw Tessa call 3 times back to back, then an unknown number, then a voicemail that stretched long enough to suggest tears. Yet before I could even consider breaking my own rule, the work phone lit up with a message from a journalist who wanted to quote the line in a short piece about professional boundaries and women refusing to absorb guilt for other people's choices. And when I said yes to that, keeping my private inbox shut and my attention pointed at something that actually builds my life, my doorbell rang, and I looked at the camera feed and saw a familiar face on my porch holding a gift bag like a hall pass, which is exactly when I smiled to myself because I already knew that if she was here for me, she would have been in the room yesterday, and if she was here for damage control, then whatever she was about to say would be the final confirmation that silence had done what my explanations never could. Through the camera by the door, I watched Tessa shift her weight and lift the gift bag like a prop that might erase a whole day, and although the part of me that loves history and shared jokes wanted to open the door and make it easy, I kept my hand on the latch and let her talk through the speaker, because if we were going to do this, then we were going to do it honestly, and she started with the lines I could have written for her in my sleep, the ones about last-minute changes and a car that would not cooperate and a boss who still thinks favors are free when they are not, and in the middle of the explanation there was a plea to fix the optics, because people were talking, and she did not like how it looked, which told me more than she realized. Since when you care about a person you show up for the person, and when you care about the optics you show up for yourself, so I said in the calm voice I reserve for complicated truths that I would not be accepting apologies delivered like press releases, that if she wanted to make it right there were exactly 2 paths that meant anything now. She could add her name to the list by sponsoring seats for people who could not afford travel, or she could volunteer for the next round and actually be in the room. And I told her I was not collecting gifts to display on a shelf like proof that someone thought of me after they missed the point. I was collecting action, and if action felt too heavy then maybe what we had was a habit, not a friendship. She tried to hand the bag toward the camera, and I thanked her for the thought while telling her to keep it, not to be cruel, but because my house is not a museum for guilt. And when she said this is not fair and that I know who stirred the pot and that I should hear her out before I let rumors harden into facts, I told her there were no rumors to clean up because the only facts that matter are public and simple. There were seats with our names on them and they sat empty. I said the sentence I said, and now I am moving forward with the people who can manage daylight, and I wished her well and ended the call without unlocking anything, then muted my doorbell for the first time in years and felt an odd wave of steadiness that did not feel like winning. It felt like growing a spine I had already earned. By midday, the family thread had become a small courtroom where everyone practiced speeches for a trial no one was going to conduct. Screenshots of my line floated between cousin takes and aunt edits. Half-hearted defenses of my mother's calendar appeared next to comments about how the live stream was beautiful and did we like the flowers, and because I had removed myself from the room where that noise lives. I caught up only through a cousin I trust who sent me a summary without colorful language, and her quick message had the kind of clarity that would have saved me years if I had learned to listen sooner, because it turns out the absence was not a glitch. It was a culture, and cultures do not change because you cry on the phone. They change when you stop feeding them what they demand. The line began to travel beyond our circle faster than I expected, and a local business editor sent a note through my work account asking for a comment on the program and on the boundary inside that sentence, and I gave a simple reply that stayed on the book. That thanked the community show up, and that repeated in one clean line that attendance is not love language when it is reserved only for the moments that benefit favor, and within an hour the piece went live and then jumped in when a national outlet quoted it in a short column about women choosing silence over flirting. And suddenly the same relatives who could not find chairs yesterday found their way to my public comments, heart emojis, and soft praise that were like an attempt to paste themselves onto a moment they did not build, which left me with a decision I had not faced before. Whether to ignore the sugar altogether or to redirect it toward the ledger that actually matters, and redirecting felt right. So each time a relative slid a compliment into a thread, I answered with the same sentence that asked them to match their words with a scholarship seat or a volunteer shift, and I pinned the link again and went on with my day. Tessa circled back with a long message that admitted she panicked and that she understood why I was hurt and that she wanted to do the sponsor route, but also that she needed me to stop making her look like a bad friend. And while I did not read it line by line, I caught enough in the preview to recognize the familiar shape of accountability that still centers the person being held to account, so I left it unopened and moved a call with the podcast team into an earlier slot, and, before we hung up, the producer asked if I would be comfortable reading out the names of the donors at the end of the episode, a roll call of who showed up that would become an audio record attached to the work itself, and I said yes with a clarity that surprised me. Because a public absence had earned a public ledger, and I was done acting like sunshine wipes the record clean. By evening, an email with legal letterhead arrived from the boyfriend of a cousin, full of bluster about defamation and reputation, and the danger of vague statements that could be construed to harm. And I laughed in the kind way you laugh when you realize someone thinks you are still playing the old game, because I had never named a soul, and the only thing at risk was the comfort of people who prefer a world where no one keeps score. So I forwarded it to a friend who practices law and returned to the donors list, which had grown enough to fund a full block of community seats, and I drafted one last post for morning that would announce a new name for that block, a simple title that no one in my family could claim as theirs without doing the work. And as I scheduled it to publish, I felt the phone vibrate once more with a message from my mother that began with "We need to talk before it gets bigger," which made me smile because by this time tomorrow it would be bigger and it would be official, and the only conversation left would be the one where she decides whether to join the list like everyone else or to sit in the quiet she helped build, while I step onto a podcast that will end with me reading the names of the people who actually showed up. Morning arrived with the scheduled post sliding into the world without fanfare or apology, a simple announcement that the block of community seats had not only been funded, but expanded into a standing program I named the ICU Fund. A name chosen not as a jab, but as a promise to the strangers who had proved in one crowded day that support can come from places that never asked for credit, and as the notifications multiplied in that relentless way modern life loves, I watched my private inbox keep blinking like a fire alarm I refused to silence with my old habit of rushing toward other people's discomfort, because today was not for triage or for smoothing optics or for taking a familiar tour through everyone else's reasons. Today was for the work and for the people who showed up, and for the clean line between the two. Before noon I sat in a small studio with a decent microphone and a producer who did not waste my time, and when the light went on I walked through the program the way I always wanted to be able to speak about it. Steady and specific, and without the softening filter I used to drape over myself when I worried about being called difficult, and at the end, when he asked if I would read the names of the donors and volunteers, I did it slowly and with intention, each name a marker of what it means to be present, and when I finished I added one sentence for the record, that attendance is a choice and that excuses are a currency I no longer accept. Then I thanked him and signed the release and checked my work phone to find more offers than I could have predicted. which I forwarded to the team without commentary because this, right here, was the whole point, to make the attention serve the thing I built instead of letting it become a circus I was expected to manage. By the time I got home, my cousin, the one who refuses to gaslight me even when it is inconvenient for her, had sent a short message with screenshots that I did not ask for and did not gloat over. A tidy stack that showed Tessa complaining about my boundary in a group thread and trying to rally the others around a plan to wait me out until I softened, pushing the idea that a little distance would teach me humility and that missing the event would be a small, strategic way to make space for my growth, a sentence so backward it almost made me laugh, and although it would have been easy to drag those receipts into the sun and let the internet do what the internet does, I reminded myself that my goal was not spectacle, it was clarity. And clarity does not require punishment, it requires decisions that stick. So I made them, not loudly and not cruelly, but in the places where my life actually lives, by revoking access to the parts of me that require trust rather than noise, by moving my spare key to a different friend who has shown up without a prompt for years, by updating forms that listed emergency contacts and references and beneficiaries, by removing people from the calendar permissions that let them see my schedule before I even knew what I wanted, and then I wrote a single message to the work channel that coordinates the community seats and asked that our first plaque, a plain little plate that would sit on the end of a row, say in small letters, "Reserved for the ones who will be here, because I do not build rooms for ghosts anymore." In the late afternoon, we hosted a small open house for volunteers and new partners. Nothing glamorous and nothing posted until it was over, and at the door I left a printed list with security that had one requirement for entry: a name on the donor roll or the volunteer roster, which meant that when 3 relatives arrived together with the glossy smiles they wear when they are performing warmth for a camera, they were gently, professionally, and without argument directed to the public sign-up form and told that the next session would be announced soon, and while I am sure there will be a family legend about how cold I was, the truth is that I was warmer to them than they have often been to me, because I finally gave them a clear path to be part of my life that does not run through my capacity to forgive on demand. When the room emptied and we stacked chairs with the easy rhythm that comes from honest work, I walked back to the stage for a quiet minute and asked the videographer to roll, not for a statement and not for a clap back, just for a record I could live with. And I read the names of the donors one more time because I wanted the audio to sit with the lights, and then I looked straight into the lens and said the line exactly once. To anyone watching who did not show up, I see you, and I let the sentence hang where it belonged without dressing it up, after which I turned off the mic, thanked the crew, and packed my bag with the ease of someone who has stopped negotiating with herself. On the way out, I opened my personal inbox for the first and only action it would get from me. I selected every unread message from the week, and I exported them into a single archive that I labeled the Museum of Explanations, which I saved to a drive that is not connected to my phone so I could not touch it by accident on a weekday, and then I cleared the rest and turned off notifications completely, because the truth is not that I did not have a response. The truth is that my response was the life I am building without a hand stretched backward for permission, and if anyone wants to find me, they know where the volunteer form lives and how the donation link works, and they also know that I did not open a single message, not one. Because sometimes the most brilliant move is not a speech or a trap or a public trial. Sometimes it is the quiet that follows a boundary you finally choose to keep.